This week on New to You, the comic book artist R. Crumb and the John Waters film Hairspray. Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of New to You show. This week we are starting a new theme, which is the cult or fringe, not the cult, but cult, not occult, but cult. So things that I guess we can discuss the definition of cult a little bit, but before we do, let me introduce you to the co-host this week. With me is
Jules, Julien Koetsch.
All right, Jules.
Good
hi.
job saying your name.
Also with me is
Mary
Varn.
Varn.
Good job, everybody. So,
And you are?
I am John Holt. So we have 3 hosts this week. Keith was not able to meet up with us, but he did give us a pick. So we're gonna maybe get into that next week if we can get him on at some point or catch some audio for his thoughts on some of this stuff. I'll try to get it in there, but play it by ear. Yeah. New to me this week, I watched Rise of the Guardians, which was like a CG animated movie. I had heard about it, read about it. I just it was on HBO on demand. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do this while I do some other tasks let it kind of play in the background. It was cute. Well done.
Yeah, I'd actually heard decent things about it, which surprised me because at first it seemed like a terrible idea, but
yeah.
And it was also directed by, what's his name? 300 guy.
Oh, right.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He also did the Superman movie recently.
And No.
Yeah, Watchmen.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. Yeah.
Is it a good
remember
holiday
his
movie?
name.
Should I watch
Zack
it over Christmas?
Snyder?
Yes, Zack Snyder.
I don't think it's a holiday movie, really.
But it was his first foray into animation.
Huh.
Right. Yeah, which was I guess in some of the action scenes are kind of like slow-mo-y owl action.
There are moments, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's playful. It's entertaining. Pretty classic, family fare. It's good. Dark. Some fighting and violence. Ooh. But yeah, is anything new to you, Jules, this week?
Yes. I took a train trip to DC and back, so I got to get a couple movies in that were on my to-watch list. So I watched Steven Spielberg's Lincoln. And I also watched Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan. Black Swan had been on my to-watch list for quite some time, but my girlfriend didn't want to watch it because everything that she saw and heard about, she was like, no, that's not going to be fun. Yeah. I really enjoyed it. I had mixed feelings about it while I was watching it, but by the time it all concluded, I really, really liked it. And Lincoln was also solid, surprisingly kind of dry and political.
Yeah, for like a vampire hunting movie, it's really...
Yeah, it's it was surprising.
Not as sexy as Black Swan. Black Swan, I liked it too. It was a lot sexier than I had expected it to be.
Yeah, I guess I'd already heard a lot about it, so it sort of met my expectations. But it kind of felt like at first I was like, this is kind of simple and a little bit dumb. But then by the end, it felt like it kind of rose above itself in a way. Like, I don't know, like the ending was really good, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mary, what was new to you this past week?
I went to Albuquerque with you, John, and we went to the Albuquerque Zoo. And that was really cool. I hadn't been to a zoo in a long time, and it was a very entertaining zoo. They had all the big animals.
White rhino.
Yeah, orangutans, gorillas. A gorilla came up to us and beat on the glass. They had a big old lion with a mane, and
a gorilla threw poop at people.
Yes,
Nice.
It hit one dude in the face, and then it almost hit my brother, but he dodged.
So
it.
it's a lively zoo. The animals still got some fight left in them.
Yeah, but I felt conflicted because the last zoos I'd been to were more like natural habitat zoos, big fields, like the one in Montgomery, Alabama, where I went to high school. It was like that, and
like
so I felt
zoo.
conflicted because I was kind of like, oh wow, the animals are right there, so cool, but they don't have a lot of space, and I just
Yep.
just seemed like not the best for them.
Yeah, last time I went to a zoo was in Tokyo, of all places. And and it was kind of a downer. I was kind of like, all the animals just looked sad, and like the polar bears, like one of the polar bears was just like pacing back and forth, like, and just seemed distraught. And there was a bison in a tiny lot, and it was just sitting there like looking super sad. And I don't know, it just was like but I enjoyed watching all the little like Japanese school kid groups, because they all wore like matching little hats and stuff. So I was watching the people more than the animals.
So what do you guys, let's get into our theme this week. There's some debate. I mean, we kind of kept it broad with like a cult and fringe aspect. So what do you guys see? Like, what defines cult to you, and when is something cut off from being cult, I guess, would be another question within there.
Yeah, I think the biggest kind of discussion there were kind of like two ideas. Because one, cult fringe, the one idea of cult is that it's basically just like really out there or obscure, or like almost like it's cult because it's just so weird that very few people are going to like it. Right. And then there's the other kind of, I feel like newer maybe idea of cult, which is basically anything that has a rabid fan base or an avid following. So films that like I wouldn't immediately think of as cult, such as The Big Lebowski, for example, is thought of as cult because it now has this big following, and people, there's like a store dedicated to it, and people, like, there's been events based on it, and people dress up as the characters, etc. So even though I think a somewhat mainstream, approachable film by well-known directors, it's still considered a cult film because it has that kind of avid fan base.
Yeah, I always thought of it as being something that didn't do that great necessarily when it first came out. Like, maybe it did okay, and then, like you said, it has a really crazy fan base. I always thought of the fan base as being more the very behaving in an odd way about it. Like, for instance, Rocky Horror Picture Show. I mean, not that that's odd, but, they like the live performance is a big aspect of it, these midnight things. The where it gets weird for me is, well, there's a lot of geeky things, because we're kind of into a lot of geeky things that by this definition would be considered cult, that I would not consider cult, maybe because they're so mainstream to me.
Well,
like Firefly or
maybe
any
not
show
even,
that got
what
canceled.
About something like, so if our definition was something that creates a culture around it where people dress up, where they like,
which is anything geeky,
quote the movie, where they're like, basically a small culture develops around it, I would say that Star Wars ticks those boxes, but is not, I would not call it a cult.
Yeah, because that did great when it came out.
I'd call it mainstream. And I would almost argue maybe that Big Lebowski at this point, part of that may be, I guess, one sort of aspect I see in cult is that the fan base may appreciate it in a different way than it was intended to some degree. So it's like there's a problem. That's why you can almost discredit what could be considered like intentional cult films. So unintentional cult is sort of what I would say that makes a true cult thing, which is usually inaccessibility or someone discovering it later on, but appreciating it from an aspect, a rabid aspect usually, that's outside of its normal understanding. And the Lebowski, like dressing like the characters and sort of wrapping yourself in it, it's sort of a question mark is when does it become so big that, or so straightforward that it's just like, this is just a mainstream way to enjoy this.
Well, what about like Firefly? What would you say? Where'd you come down on that? I
mean, that one, it might even be, it was cult back when you had the fans who were pushing to make it into like that rabid fan base who were pushing to make the movie, get it back. That drive and energy is what propelled it into the mainstream more.
And there's a lot of cosplay.
And I think that was the point at which it turned into being more of a niche culture. Like Artifact versus a cult.
Right.
like thing. I mean, it doesn't mean it's not fringe. It's still like that's, we're getting into like nitpicking, like what is niche, what is
Right.
Yeah.
like subculture, what is fringe, what is like ultra or what outra, like what is a cult thing. And so I think
another part of it too is when a film basically initially doesn't have, or like when a thing doesn't initially have, like has maybe moderate success, but then has sort of like has a long tail, like has staying power. Mm-hmm. Whereas like The Big Lebowski was, like did pretty well, I think, but it wasn't huge. And, a lot of films that fit that category can then be forgotten about, but it managed to like stick, it managed to like, because people love it so much, they continue to recommend it, and it stayed in the consciousness.
But I guess then my question is, so what's the difference between a cult classic or a cult sort of like following and a classic?
Right. Yeah, I guess that I feel like that definition's blurred more because I feel like we live with the internet and all that stuff. We live in an era where it's hard to have that true cultness, because access is easy nowadays. Like even the most obscure thing, you can find it online. Right. So I think in a way, like the pure cult, like underground stuff, it really has to be out, like so far out there that basically like you're embarrassed to bring it up in public in most situations. And basically that's what you'll find on 4chan and places like that, where there's, it's always going to be cult because it's just kind of sick in some way, or just like, just very extreme.
Right.
I guess. And I guess in a way you could say the same thing about like the whole idea of being a geek or a nerd. Like that used to be like, you used to be the odd man out, that used to be special, and now it's sort of become more mainstream to be that. And the terms lost some of its oomph, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think now we're ready to talk about that.
Yeah. So let's, now that we've kind of talked it through, we'll jump into our first topic.
We're gazing at each other, but we're inside our looking. No room for fun with love this strong. You tried to keep from us all a secret we somewhat know about the sun, the moon, the stars. We have this way of talking, and then we have another. Apart from what
When I listen to old music, that's one of the few times when I actually have a kind of a love for humanity. You hear the best part of the soul of the common people, it's their way of expressing their connection to eternity, or whatever you want to call it. Modern music doesn't have that calamitous loss that people can't express themselves that way anymore,
Jules.
Yes.
This week you are bringing us our first cult pick.
Yes.
Elucidate.
All right.
Tell us more.
So, and I think this one's called maybe more fringe. But at first, so it's Robert Crumb, and it's the man, his work, and the documentary about him.
Right, which is it's just called Crumb.
Yeah, it's called Crumb. And at first, I thought of him first, and then I thought, okay, well, his comics, because they were quote unquote underground comics, and in the 60s and 70s, and he was a big voice in that scene. But then, I knew about him, but I really got more interested in him and his work when I saw the documentary Crumb. And I feel like he himself is just kind of and the reason his work is interesting is that he's kind of an oddball, and he himself is kind of like a fringe, and I think now has grown to be a little bit of a cult figure, like because he's such a strong distinctive personality. I think people, can have certain specific ideas about him and that sort of thing. And maybe like some people, I don't know, like, because I think you see it in the documentary, like kind of worship him in a way.
And I think what's important there too is that he has a certain level of controversy, and for the people who worship him, there are also the people who have strong objections to his work or to him as an artist, like the way he presents himself, and that I think helps sort of keep him well off to the side, like keeps him as a fringe character in our popular culture.
Yeah, and
he's very influential.
Yeah, and the interesting thing too is that he, and this is a lot of what you learned in the film, is that he himself rejects our current popular culture, and also sort of like he's kind of a private person who kind of is not comfortable with the attention that he gets. Of course, he certainly benefits from it in a lot of ways, but he's just one of these artists, famous artists, who is not comfortable with the fame part of it, and just wants people to, is happy for people to like his work, but would just rather just do his own thing and be left alone. And he also, so I guess let me talk a little bit about him and his work, just so people who don't know anything about him get a sense of him. I think part of why I picked him is like he is kind of out there, but I feel like the documentary is approachable, and I feel like he's not too far out there, because I was at first like wanted to pick something really cult that was like really like more obscure and more strange, but I was like, this is new to you, this is something that I'm going to recommend to a stranger. I'm not going to go that far yet until I know the person a little bit more. So some of the other pick ideas I had, like I thought this was kind of a better pick for that reason. So his comics, which was the first thing that he's known for, are so he came out of the 60s, and it was through some so he always drew comics as a kid with his brothers, and so drawing and making comics was kind of just part of who he was. And then he had experiences, even though he was kind of an uptight square kind of guy, he had some early psychedelic drug experiences with some hippies type of stuff, and that really like popped open his subconscious, and from there he just started making comics that were basically, I think, like a representation of like pure id, in a sense, where it was just his subconscious desires, feelings, all of the pop culture that he'd ingested as a child up until that point, just all sort of like combining and just spilling out of his pen. And I think and he said that early LSD experience was so much of all the stuff he became known for just came right out of all that stuff, and then he just kind of built on it and learned, I think, to just trust his subconscious. I mean, there's a scene in the documentary where he just is drawing, and he's being asked about what he's drawing, and he says that he just kind of lets it happen in a way. And so you end up with some really just kind of silly stuff in his work, and also a lot of sexual themes, a lot of objectification of women, and I think the kind of sexual fantasies that most people just keep to themselves and almost feel ashamed about after they've maybe climaxed or whatever. But he just puts it all out there, and it's both sometimes kind of sick, sometimes bizarre, and in a way it's kind of what makes it interesting. It's a little bit shocking at times, but it's also it's kind of refreshing to just have it all out there. And I guess another thing to say is that what turns him on is very odd. It's not mainstream. He doesn't have mainstream taste in women, and the things he fantasizes about are very odd. So even though I think it is still like objectification and just like kind of teenage fantasy kind of stuff, because it's so strange, and because the women that he's into are not your average, or it's not the like skinny model mainstream picture of what an ideal woman is. He actually likes women. I think people find it find that refreshing. And, some of his partners and women who are kind of drawn to him find there was actually like an ego boost for himself to see an image of a woman like them being an object of desire, which they weren't used to. They were used to feeling bad about themselves and that sort of thing. So it's kind of like a weird mix of like misogyny and glorification of women, because his women are very strong and powerful and all this and that. And then there's also but he's also a musician, and he loves old music like jazz and bluegrass and blues. He kind of rejects everything else mostly, and he also, and his like passion for that music has led him to do a lot of stuff around like drawing old musicians and
like a trading card set of old musicians.
And also playing music himself. He plays the banjo and stuff like that, and so I think that's kind of a good encapsulation of kind of like where his interests are. And I don't know, I guess I'll let you guys take the floor, and maybe you can talk more specifically either about his comics or the documentary. Take it away, somebody.
Yeah, go for it, Mary. Have you had, like, I got access through Crumb back, just getting into comics and the sort of like out there 70s comics that like my uncles like would have, like, you have your Rat Finks and your Heavy Metals and the sort of like out there 70s kind of stuff. This is like the adult or like zippy pinhead versions of like Mad and Cracked. But so I didn't grow up, but I had access to the stuff, and I knew about it. And then getting into school, knew about him, Harvey Kurtzman, all these cartoonists. So what about you, Mary? What did you?
I am definitely not as familiar with him as you guys are. I've definitely always heard of him, and I think when I've seen the comics, I get a little like he has a lot of text, and I'm like, oh, a wall of text. and so I just look at the pictures, and I've never really if somebody gave me a book, of course I would read it, but it's just kind of, you see the images in passing, and I love his drawing style. He has this very like confident line and a lot of cross hatching, and I love how he does all this cartoony stuff, but you can also see that he really knows how to draw very well, and I just, I love that, and the documentary was super interesting, and the discussion about how he portrays women, I thought was just a really interesting sort of question about art in general, and one of the women in the documentary who's actually had a falling out with him about this, Trina Robbins, I think is her name. She used to publish comics with him, I think, in the same...
And with his wife.
Zap Comics or something. Maybe, I don't know if it was a...
Well, there was Zap Comics and Underground Comics were the two kind of big, like, underground comic publications he was involved in. Yeah.
So I don't know if I come down on the same side as her and disagreeing that he should put this out there, but I think she asked an interesting question of, maybe this is in your head and everything, but should you be putting this out for everybody, the world, kids, etc., to read? And I just thought that was like, that really is the question in kind of like books and movies and art and everything. And I guess with Crumb, I feel like you said, Jules, it's such this like id sort of thing. It's his psyche, and it's so autobiographical, even though it's not always him, his character, like, although he does seem to feature himself, like obviously his character in the comics a lot. So it just seems like sort of that's more acceptable to me, I guess. Kind of like we talked about Egon Schiele a few weeks ago, and he's, he had all these portraits of women in these very sexualized poses, and it was controversial at the time because it was in the early 1900s, but I've never thought of that as being like that's misogynistic or bad for women because it's art.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you know, it's,
Well, I mean, that's a question too. So nowadays you have these webcomic guys doing comics, and some are autobiographical and poorly autobiographical, like Mary Sue kind of stuff, where they're like, there's a difference between injecting yourself into a character and telling your story and your emotions through characters. It's a different taste level and quality level, but you kind of see these comics like the Penny Arcade controversies about, you know, over the line jokes with rape or other sort of things, which honestly do deserve to be spotlighted and talked about. And I'd say with the Crumb stuff, there's a little bit more awareness of that it is dark, and he knows, like, there's that awareness there. This is something dark and primeval and sort of is coming out, and there's emotion there. It's not just trying to get the laugh or trying to get the joke. It's the jokes are uncomfortable and the laughs are like uneasy, and that's the point. Like, that's really important to it.
And it's so obviously, I think, from his psyche, and not, whereas I think in a like a mainstream film or something that has the sexy tag-along girl character that is only there to be the sexy tag-along girl character, that's more of a mainstream kind of like, this is supposed to be a story that could be an acceptable depiction of reality, whereas these Crumb comics, like, you know, a lot of them are very surreal.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would think that.
Right. But I guess too, the other challenge you were discussing is, should people be given access to something that could promote negative, like there are comics he has that can be, you know, are taken as extremely racist and sort of an unfolding and an uncovering of our Crumb's own sort of like racial issues. And I think, I mean, they kind of say, like, Crumb and his, you know, supporters kind of say, look, this is more about like white people's issues with race, and
Like, he's making fun of that,
Right.
and not.
and it's about but the problem is, and this is always going to be a problem, like you said, with art, is who is your audience, and should you worry about the people who aren't your audience and will take it the wrong way?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I think, well, first of all, I feel like very few of his comics, at least not to my mind, are like straight up funny, like a comedy to me. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't, well, I guess that's not true, but I feel like he has some like more silly ones, and then there's the more like straight auto-bio ones, and I feel like they're pretty separate. You know what I mean? And so so I feel like he's rarely like going for a gag. It's just like, this is my fantasy. This is like what's happening in my mind. But yeah, in terms of the discussion about, you know, I mean, I was saying what is refreshing is the fact that it is so unfiltered, but at the same time, I guess what we're talking about here is, you know, there's a reason that most people do filter themselves.
Right.
And so, I'm in a way, I think it's refreshing, and often like and you know, like you were saying, it's just honest, and it's like, I think, you know, I mean, race issues in America are messed up, and it's like there's not enough honest conversation because it's so loaded, and because, it's just fraught with all kinds of stuff. So, you know, I think just, again, putting that out there just in the same way that he puts his dark fantasies, I think in the end that because it's so rare, just that unfiltered honesty, I think, is important. At the same time, if everyone did that all the time, I think that would suck, you know? but also I feel like his stuff, you do have to seek his stuff out enough that it's not just like, printed in the funny papers. It's not just like reblogged on Tumblr, or I guess that might be. But, it's like you do have to seek his stuff out. I feel like it's not just going to just like appear in front of the average Joe who's going to just take it the wrong way that much.
Right. And I think what does bode well for it in terms of like a case for its validity and what people are seeing in it and the right people seeing it stuff is his influence on the current generation and the following generations of comic artists. The women that he was with, he heavily influenced in terms of the styles that they were doing and his own time as a comic artist. But then you have Chris Ware, Daniel Clowes, all being, very heavily influenced by him. And
yeah, big time.
And just, that's where their sensibilities, like even the ideas of old timey, the Disney comics and the Walt Kelly pogo kind of stuff and old timey music and records, that's Ghost World.
Yeah. And
Ghost World is a template. Daniel Clowes looked back at that kitsch stuff and looked back at the, he's only like 17. Oh, he's not too much younger than R. Crumb, but he's young enough that he's the next generation. In his comics, he has all those references to kitsch pop culture, to the guy who's searching for the old records. That's there, and it's somewhat folded in with some more modern references, but he's sort of created a template and made it so that indie comics draw those elements now too. Like he drew a path and all the ants are following it, kind of thing. And I think that influence came from Crumb in a big way. And I don't think Crumb was intentionally doing it. I think Clowes is more aware of.
Yeah, I feel like Crumb was the original sweaty white guy. Because like you named all those guys and like, yeah, you're right. Like, I knew that Chris Ware was hugely influenced by him in that, like, he admires him and, is kind of jealous of Crumb in a way. Because he released a sketchbook collection where he's kind of like, I'm just copying our Crumb and, and kind of feeling self-conscious about how influenced he is by him. But also, like, when you named those three guys, what I pictured was drawings of insecure white guys sweating, and also like and around like their repressed sexual desires. I think I don't know how we're
getting. So I think too, one kind of quick thing to talk about is
I want to talk about the documentary just a little bit.
Yeah, just real quickly. I also his contemporaries. You had Harvey Pekar that he was working with and doing the comics of. And that's another, those guys are like-minded, and there were a lot of comic guys. Crumb was just part of and maybe one of the central figures in the underground comic movement that sort of, I think, continues on off to the side still, but it's become more mainstream a little bit with indie comics, but I think it's different.
Yeah. I still feel like that time period of comics is kind of unique, right. And even though it was influential, I feel like it's not like it's I guess in a way if you do that style now, it's dated in no sense. It was such a specific time and place,
right?
But I feel like he's one of the few that really like kind of was a little bit more timeless. I think it's one of those things where people like who all come out around the same time, there's kind of a movement, but at the same time everyone's really different. They're influenced by each other, but whatever. Sorry.
Yeah. So the documentary. So Terry Zwigoff, who this was his second film. His first one was a documentary. It was from '85. It was a documentary about a blues musician. This film, which released in '94, was filmed and sort of wrapped up, I think, as Crumb moved to France in '93. That's sort of where the documentary leaves off. And so Zwigoff knew Crumb since the 70s. They were friends. They actually played music together. They have a similar interest in that stuff. Zwigoff went on to work with Clowes and did Art School Confidential, Ghost World, and he also did Bad Santa. That was his other film. But so the documentary takes a slice of Crumb where his brothers are now, and sort of his sisters. He has 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and he's the middle of the 3 brothers. And at this stage in time, his mother was still alive. His sisters were alive but refused to show up in the documentary. One of them died a few years. Declined. And
Refused
one of them
sounds
died
so
a few years.
defiant.
Like the mother and one of the daughters died not too long, maybe a few years after, like in 97, 98. One of cancer, and the mother just died of sort of old age. And his brother, so his older brother was the one who got him into comics and was
Almost like forced him into comics, as he describes it.
Well, it's interesting too. Their father was an illustrator in the Marine Corps. He was a battle illustrator. So there was sort of this family history of illustration and cartooning. So the brother gets him into comics, pushes them on that, and it's sibling rivalry. The youngest brother, they all have these. The youngest brother is also sort of pulled along into this, but you kind of see this range of dysfunction and mental illness within them. The one brother is, confessed, not in the documentary, but in interviews, was to confess like had pedophilic tendencies. I mean, they kind of go into it roughly in the documentary, but he had never went through with them and never gave into that kind of stuff. But it led to his eventual suicide and multiple attempts up into the documentary. And then the younger brother became this aesthete kind of guy who tries to purge himself of his sexual feelings and thoughts because they cause seizures in him. So Crumb is almost the normal one sexually when you get into that. It's
not just sexually, but just in general. Like at first,
socially. Yeah,
at first you think, oh man, what a strange guy, and he's kind of shy and all this stuff. But then you meet his brothers, and you're like, wow, he's like he seems totally normal. But I think the other interesting thing is that I think he is, and they kind of mention that in the documentary. I think the fact that he was friends and knew Zwigoff well really paid off for the documentary, because you definitely feel this total comfort, and like he has his guard down and he's just being himself. And for someone who's not comfortable with talking and being open publicly and all that kind of stuff, I feel like he just seems like he's just totally at ease in a lot of the film.
Mary, what did you think about the film before we wrap things up on it?
I mean, I enjoyed it. We
kind of talked it through.
Talked about it already.
All right. Well, so the film was released in '94. Zwigoff worked on it for a long time. I don't know. That's kind of it. It is available. Criterion released a version of it not too long ago with like a remastered print. It is a really well-made documentary. It doesn't answer the questions. It just raises a lot of good questions and makes you want to go out and learn more and draw your own conclusions about someone's life, which maybe you shouldn't do, but more sort of lays it out there, which is rare. And
you really feel like it's a good portrait. You get a good sense of him and his life coming from it in a non-judgmental way. I feel.
Yeah. So you can probably find this on iTunes. Definitely find it on Criterion. You can find R. Crumb's comics. I don't know if they're all online, but you definitely can find them in art-friendly bookstores and comic book stores.
Yeah. He doesn't. I looked. So far you can't purchase download them as digital comics anywhere, but you can order the books online. The R. Crumb documentary is currently available for streaming for free on Crackle, which is this one of these weird I think studio owned streaming websites that's kind of an alternative to Netflix. I think it's crackle.com or .tv or something, but
I don't know.
And I think you just have to register, and you can watch all kinds of stuff for free on there, and there's an iPad app and that sort of thing. So you can watch it free there, and possibly on Hulu, because I know they have a lot of Criterion stuff, but I didn't double check.
Yeah, I don't know for sure. But yeah, so check out Crumb, check out his books.
Robert Crumb.
Watch some Zwigoff stuff.
Remember when I was drawing this, there was this young girl there, and she was laughing, oh, isn't that cute? And to me, it was all like a horror show, this whole thing. And she just thought it was really cute and happy looking to me. It was just like a drawing of the horror of America.
It's Madison time. Hit it.
Baltimore, 1962.
Looking good. A big
The heyday
star.
of hairdos and hair don'ts.
We shall overcome someday.
Not with that hair, you won't.
Heartthrobs and hefty girls.
Mama, welcome to the 60s.
Hot dates and hit talkers.
No matter what you've heard, we are going to teach the white children how to do the birds.
Flap your wings, flap your wings.
Beatniks and hair hoppers.
I can't see through
Hey, so this week my pick is Hairspray, the 1988 John Waters Hairspray, not the new one.
From 2007.
Sure, not that one. I don't know when it's from. I've never watched it. So this is definitely probably his most mainstream film, but it is John Waters, who's kind of a cult favorite. And this film didn't do super well, I think, when it got released. Maybe better than his other ones, but
It didn't do super well.
yeah.
It like did okay.
Yeah.
But on VHS it just
so then
exploded.
it did, yeah.
It grossed $8 million
There you go.
in theaters.
Yeah. So that's kind of why I'm how I'm defending it as a cult pick, and you'll see it on lists of cult films. I had this film on beta because we had a beta VCR before we realized we should get a VHS, and then we got a VHS, but we taped all these movies off of HBO and stuff on beta. So I watched it a lot over and over again, and so I just kind of grew up with this, and I really loved it. It's if you're not familiar with it, it's basically set in the 1960s in Baltimore, and it's Ricki Lake is the star. She's a teenage hair hopper, they call her. She teases her hair up, so it's in that style where it's really high and uses a lot of hairspray. And she is a heavy girl, and she gets on this teenage dance show that's on live TV. And in the kind of the plot of the movie is that there's moves to integrate the dance show, because this is in the 60s and civil rights is a big deal, and this show is still segregated, and so that's kind of what it's about. And it's I grew up in Alabama, but before I moved there, I lived in Germany, and I was kind of around. My dad was in the Air Force, so I was around a lot of military families, and I kind of had this when I was a kid. I kind of had this concept of racism and stuff, and it was probably a lot of it was informed by this movie. And there's this great scene of Ricki Lake's friend, Penny, I think is her name. Her mom goes into the black part of Baltimore and goes to this record shop, and she's just petrified. She just turns around, and she just all the people, anybody she sees, she's just screaming at them and offering them money, she thinks they're going to take her money. And that scene just always stands out to me. It's funny. But yeah, that's all I'm going to say for right now.
So I saw this movie in the theater in 88.
Oh, wow.
So my
Nice.
sisters, because Dirty Dancing came out in 87. So, and I have,
Did you see that in the theater?
yeah.
Oh, awesome.
And I have sisters, and so they're
Dirty Dancing is rated R, isn't it?
yeah, but it's dancing and musicals and stuff. So we saw
You
that.
were 9 or 10?
I was 9.
It's not
or
rated
10.
R.
Dirty Dancing? Really?
I think it's
Oh,
PG-13 or something.
Okay, you weren't 13.
No, I was not. We were young. So, and then this came out, and it was touted as a musical. it was rated PG. John Waters, like his movies up to this point
Oh
have
yeah,
been
I'm
like
sorry, I
rated
forgot
X.
to say that it's a musical.
Well, it's kind of not at the same time. You know what I mean? It can be.
Yeah.
It's a dance movie.
That's true.
You know, where you have people dancing and you have some people singing, but it's not like musical numbers. It's more. I mean, there are a couple moments where it turns into that.
I feel like the film in general is hard to categorize.
Right.
It's not any one thing. I don't think.
And I think he was definitely drawing from multiple influences with that.
It's a kitsch period comedy.
And that's true. I mean, he was sort of, it's campy.
Yeah.
And being PG and John Waters, like being campy and disgusting, John Waters is more within his fan base's wheelhouse than at that time, his cult following, his fan wheelhouse than a 88 PG cult weird thing that he was doing. So this was almost not quite hitting the mark of the stuff he was hitting before in terms of subject matter, the shock and the stuff, but it was hitting a weirdness. It was outside his original sort of vein, and I think that didn't turn people off who watched him, but it confused a lot of his followers. So the other aspect of this is that there's almost like a 1960s musical optimism that you see in films that were being made at the time, like those Disney sort of like, hey everybody, it's a great time.
Yeah,
but
gee whiz.
Yeah, and you have a character who is really strong. Like he has great strong women characters.
Yeah, and she's like super sunny and happy and just
and even the way like the racism is treated, the filth of the like slums in these areas that they live in, and the sort of downtrodden areas that they frequent are somewhat elevated, or at least like taken in the same stride as the meanness of the people who'd hate on her for being fat or try to exclude her. And the character just rolls right off her and she keeps going forward. And it's all the acting is weird and really good for being weird. And the cast is just crazy. You have Ricky Lake. So you have a few of John Waters' Dreamlanders like Divine and Mink Stole. Divine plays two characters. I don't know if this is his first or her first like male character she played in a John Waters film, but so she plays two characters, the mother and this mean television station owner for this local cable access thing. But you have some great like cameos. Sonny Bono is the dad of the villain girl, and Debbie Harry is the mom of the villain girl. So you have these weird things, and then you also have like just moments where they go to they end up in a beatnik's like den, and you have what's his name from the Cars, Rick Okazek is there like painting a painting, and Pia Zadora, this like actress musician, she was in another cult film called Santa Claus Conquers the Martians back in the 60s. But you have these sort of just weird, he finds interesting people with interesting stories in and of themselves, and even if their cameos are short and succinct,
it just adds to the texture
to the
of the
whole
film.
like you can really get into the weirdness.
And all of his films are set in Baltimore, aren't they?
Most of them
are.
Yeah, he's from Baltimore, and I think he likes.
I don't think all of them are though.
No.
But a lot of them are.
But yeah, I also really love this film, and I just like you described, I just love that mix of gee whiz, gee golly kind of campiness and optimism mixed with and it's an uplifting story with a happy ending, and the good guys win, the bad guys lose, and like it's very clear who's who and what's what, and like you said, he treats everything lightly, even though there's like some like serious themes and all civil rights and all that kind of stuff, and even with all that, it's like at the same time, like all the characters are just like strange, like you said, that the leading the main character is this like pleasantly plump just hyper enthusiastic girl, and who just wins everybody over because she just won't quit,
and she's a really good dancer.
And at the same time, there's all this, like you said, weird stuff, like like her mom is played by Divine, who's a cross-dressing man, but it all just works together. And it also, and so it's kind of like an underground guy doing something a little more with broader appeal, a little more mainstream. It made me think that around that time there was a lot of that going on. I mean, I think he was a little early on that curve, but I think late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of stuff like David Lynch, again, underground filmmaker doing weird stuff. All of a sudden he makes Twin Peaks, a TV show which in the same way kind of has, has some gee whiz, gee golly kind of characters, and some traditional movie, like television and movie tropes. But at the same time, there's just kind of all this weirdness, this kind of weird undercurrent.
Right, like playing with the structure,
Mm-hmm.
with the level of awareness.
Yeah. And also another thing that it made me think of is Pee Wee Herman, which, again, it's like it's using the idea of like a kid's show, but there's all this weird stuff and these kind of weird, like, kind of underground people, artists working on it and bringing kind of this subversion into it. So, yeah, I feel like there was kind of something going on during that time period. And I mean, I think in a funny way, like with the 80s, like people think of it as a lot of these people like selling out. But I in a way, almost find their mainstream stuff more subversive because it managed to seep in. And I think, the people who were more mainstream just kind of enjoyed it on a surface level, but it introduced a lot of people who, it became cult because it had more to it than that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's great. And it makes me, in a way, I was kind of like sort of happy. Like I thought it was fun that they made it into a musical. And then I thought it's super depressing that they made the very popular musical back into a film, which, I feel like that whole process and the big Hollywood budget and making John Travolta the mom, like, just kind of like it lost all of that, like sapped it of all
the weird,
right? And then it was too self-knowing at that point.
Right.
And
I mean,
just
yeah,
kind
that's
of
the point too.
grab.
When you're casting, like you're casting a pop, like a cultish pop culture icon, like Christopher Walken.
Yeah.
In a lead, in a role that you make bigger. Yeah, he plays Harry,
Jerry Stiller.
Jerry Stiller's character in the original, the father who owns the Hardy Har,
the joke shop.
Right? Yeah,
and it becomes like, oh, really? Do you need to?
Yeah,
do you really need to try this hard to be weird? Like John Travolta in drag is not like it's like the difference between Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and Tu Wong Fu, or whatever that Wesley Snipes and drag kind of stuff was, where it's more mocking and shameful and less loving.
Because Divine was a crossdresser, owned it, and that was what he did, like John Travolta is just like, oh, won't it be wild to dress up like a lady?
Yeah, I'll be so funny.
And also he has such a skinny face and his eyes are so close together that when you put him in a fat suit, it just looks like a freak.
Yeah,
because
like bad Photoshop or something.
Right, because he's got these tiny beady eyes that are super close together and then this huge fat face around it. The second I saw that image, I was just like, ugh. Weird. Yeah. So I would say make sure you're watching the 1988 version of and avoid the 2000 and whatever, the 2007 version.
Yeah.
And one thing that I would look for in this is John Waters. It's weird. It's kind of budget a little bit at times. Yeah. But he puts in these details in these little weird moments.
Yeah. The graffiti outside her apartment. Do you guys know who drew that or what? Maybe if it's a real thing. When she walks outside of her apartment, there's all these funny
Hardy
graffiti
because it's
drawings.
The dad's store.
Oh, is that what
it's
they are?
It's the joke store advertisements. Okay. But you'll have stuff where the before the hot guy, falls in love with Ricky Lake, he's with this Amber girl, the mean girl, and they drive up in front of her house where Debbie Harry's got weird hair. But these two boys, there's no mention. They don't really hold on them. It's just two twin boys in matching blue pants and white shirt with book just kind of walk in unison across scene in the background. And it's just these little moments and details that you can watch it over and over and see how lovingly he kind of like injected his weird and his style into this thing, even though he was, you know, under some constraint and some budget. So
Yeah.
I love that. What's his name? Michael St. Gerard character. He's the heartthrob guy. I think all he did after this was he played Elvis in like 2 movies because he really looks like Elvis, and then like he didn't do much else after that. Like he kind of got typecast, I guess. Yeah. But when I was a kid, I mean, the characters are like super one note, but in
it's
charming.
It's very cartoonish.
Yeah, exactly. So like the mean girl is just a mean girl, like that's it, and he's just kind of the heartthrob off to the side. And I think when I was a kid, I just assumed like, oh, of course he falls in love with Ricky Lake because she's the good one and she's cool. But now that I'm an older and more cynical person, when I was watching it more recently, I kept thinking like, he's just into her now because she's the popular one. Like,
right. Well, but at the same time, it's kind of like, I think she's, and again, that's what's so great about the film, is like she is such a spitfire, like she's wearing the pants, you know what I mean? Like she's taking charge, and he's kind of like I think the reason that he can win him over is that he's kind of like one of these bland popular people who just kind of like, it's just, he's got good looks and you know, is an easygoing way that you know, makes him like appealing or whatever, but at the same time, like he has no personality and no like he's not an alpha type leading guy, like and so it's very easy for him to be like swept over because
and I think too, this film is one where the men are pretty backdrop to the women characters are, they aren't, no one's like overly developed or very strong and developed, but the women are good, strong, solid characters, and the guys just kind of are a lot of times just backdrop.
Yeah, it's mostly about Ricky Lake and her friend, and then her mom.
Right. Yeah, and that's definitely a refreshing thing.
And the mean girl.
Yeah, and I don't know. I just thinking about the movie just puts a big smile on my face. It just does. Like, it just makes me want to watch it, and it is really like, it's a feel good movie that that isn't so saccharine that you know, kind of reject it at the same time that it's making you feel good. You just kind of like embrace it. At least I do. I don't know.
And I think the dancing shot really well. Like you can actually watch it and say like, yeah, you know what, I could step by step this. It's like when people watch those old musicals, they're framed so you can actually see them dance. It's not like these like Baz Luhrmann like clap, clamp, 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 like cut kind of tangos. It's, you know, it's presentation. It is also calling back to the same the same reference, but it's you know, you could learn the Watusi here. It's you know,
and
it's not step up.
Yeah. Yeah, and because it's so cartoony, I think it is a pretty great movie for kids. It's not too.
Yeah, you could watch, even though it's kind of weird. You can watch it with your whole family, like
totally.
And everyone will get something out of it.
Yeah, and it has very good role models for young girls who these days are blasted with only, you know, skinny model types or whatever.
Yep. So what are you waiting for? Go watch it.
Yeah, so check out.
Yeah, but it's not on Netflix. Sorry.
But
wait a little bit to go watch it.
Hairspray is available probably digitally somewhere, probably through iTunes, maybe.
Yeah, you can buy it on Amazon and iTunes.
You can buy it
if you're rich.
Copy. Yeah. So I would check it out if you can find it. I don't know if they have rental videos anymore, but if it's get the film from 1988.
You can get the disc from Netflix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't get the one from 2007. Watch this first.
1988, John Waters.
So yeah, thanks, Mary. That was a really fun pick. It was good to watch.
I don't think it was new to you, but maybe
it was not new to us, but it was very enjoyable.
And hopefully it's new, because again, we'll get into that another time, what's new to people, but maybe in the outro. But yeah, so John Waters, 1988.
It is available on iTunes to rent for $3.99.
Oh yeah, sorry, you can rent
$2.99 SD, or to buy for $9.99 or $14.99.
And one magic potion that holds it all together.
They put me in special ed just because of my hair.
It's the times. They're a-changing. Something's blowing in the wind.
Let's get naked and smoke. Are you now, or have you ever gone steady?
You got something against Connie Francis?
White trash, plain and simple.
Fetch me my diet pills, would you, hon?
Oh, Mother, you're so 50s.
Starring Sonny Bono.
Such a question, there are many possible answers, such as hard work.
Feel I'm alone in this.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into the New to You show. This week we brought you John Waters' Hairspray from 1988 and R. Crumb, the cartoonist who had a documentary made about him by Terry Zwigoff in 94.
Documentary called Crumb.
So, thanks guys for tuning in with us. And I was one of your hosts, Lord Joho, John Holt. You can find me at Lord Joho. With me this week was
Jules, Julien Koetsch. You can find me at Beautiful Jules on Twitter.
And I'm Mary. You can find me on Twitter at Mary Varn.
All right. So it may not be new, but hopefully it was new to you. And if we have young listeners or listeners that aren't our parents or something, then maybe this stuff is new to people. Like maybe they only access.
Or maybe you're like me and you only saw Hairspray when you were a kid and you haven't seen it.
Right. And
it's
you
time
find
to watch
something
it
new.
Yeah.
And if you want to get more info, more links about everything we talked about today, check out the sweet Tumblr website. Mm-hmm. It's newtoyoushow.com.
Yep. We'll also, there are comments on there now. Maybe if people comment, we will leave notes or talk about them mockingly on the show. But we'll post links to the content herein, and you can contact the show through our Twitter at newtoyoushow and check out the site at newtoyoushow.com.
And if you like the show and listen to it through iTunes, it'd be great if you could leave us a review.
Yeah, review us on iTunes, and that will help promote the show to more people. And tweet about it, and Tumblr about it, and so forth.
Yeah, and then it'll be new to them.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and have a good night.
That separates me from paralysis. Someone's tipping the scale to give me a heavier load. Suppose I'll fall victim to work and let the life of music go. Nobody cries for the loss of a washed up John Doe. One hit wonder, a buzz, just a local around town. No distinction between the rest, pretty much your average sound. Defeated by destiny, and still don't know why I'm remaining so later down the line. I can attempt to say I tried to make a difference, all washed up and left with nothing more than some memories submerged in my failures and giving in to underachievements, letting myself go. Now another that's been cheated, but nobody will ever know since I quit before.